everybody, it's EJ from iDesign.com, and today I am super excited to introduce my new plugin for After Effects called Wiggle It. So if you know about my other After Effects plugins like Boil It or Pixelate It, you kind of get what Wiggle It is all about. You apply wiggle type animations to any layer or effect property with a click of a button, and you can create keyframeless animation like our little caterpillar guy here. So let me just break down all of the awesome, super useful features inside of Wiggle It. So all these project files I'm going to be demoing are actually included in the download of Wiggle It. So you can pick this apart, see how I animated everything, and have a lot of fun tearing apart all of my project files here. So here I have my little beehive here. We got my little single bee here, and let's just load up the Wiggle It plugin right here. And you can see that we have two modes, and I'll kind of get into this a little bit later, but we have classic, which is classic wiggle, where you can actually separate dimensions by just checking on this separate dimensions checkbox, and that will separate your X, Y, and Z in either position or rotation. So that does it automatically, which is huge. And we also have random, where you have a little bit more control over that random wiggle movement, where you can actually choose and fine-tune the minimum and maximum values for X, Y, and Z here, as well as choose the frequency. But let's just say we want to add some nice wiggly position movements to our little bee guy here. So what I'll do is I'll select the bee and then just select whatever property I want to apply wiggle to, and that is the position. I also have this as a 3D layer as well. So I want to separate dimensions so I can actually independently edit and change these, the amplitude in X, Y, and Z. So I'll just keep that checked on. And for frequency, I'll just leave this at 1 for now. And what I'm going to do is just add this to a null. And since I'm only adjusting this position parameter, I'll just uncheck share controller, because share controller is more useful when you have multiple objects that you want to control their position. So I'll just say wiggle it. And what that will do is create a nice wiggle it control layer, and that'll apply our wiggle it effect that's actually affecting our position. So we actually have this broken out into its own separate layer, so we don't have to dig into our actual layers here. We can just have it broken out into this layer. And if I ram preview here, you can see we just added some really nice wiggle to our little bee. And we have all these really super useful functions here. Again, just, very simple stuff of just adding amplitude in X, Y, and Z. Really cool thing is just to be able to oscillate the animation. So this is huge if you want to do animated GIFs or anything like that, or if you just want to add some nice subtle animation to some objects in your scene really quickly. One other thing that is super useful with oscillate, or even with oscillate off, you have all these random movements. Say you want to make a looping animated GIF, we can very easily loop the wiggle movement by just taking the number of frames in our composition, which is 89, just plugging that value into the loop time, so 89 frames, and then you'll see that this will actually have some really nice seamlessly animated wiggle. So if I just up the frequency here, you can see our bee is really going nuts, and you can see that with the loop time set, that's a seamless wiggle loop. You can also change the random seed here, and by default we actually have a layer index seed that, with this checked on, if we make multiple copies of this bee, it'll actually change the random seed based on that layer's number. So I can easily, let's just go ahead to my wiggle and just make this guy really wiggle a lot. So something like that. And then what I'm going to do is apply, he's very lonely. We need to give him some bee friends. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate the bee layer here and just duplicate it a whole bunch of times. You're going to see that because of our layer index seed, it's actually applying a different random seed to each of these individual layers. So if I ram preview this, you can see that all of our bees are randomly moving differently. So each bee has a very unique animation applied to it. So we can create some very complex animations very, very simply. And the best part about this is not only can you apply wiggle effects to everything very quickly and easily, but we can also keyframe the actual amplitude of this. So say we want our bees to start out as just one here, because that's the actual start position. We can actually keyframe the actual amplitude, which is really awesome. So you can just easily create a swarm of bees there, keyframe anything you'd like. We can also say if we want to even add more random movements to this, let's just pump up our amplitude here. And what if we want to add even more randomness to this? Well, we can add some frequency randomness as well. So that'll randomize the frequency even more. We can add some posterization effects. So say we want this to be maybe like a 5 frames per second kind of animation. So just RAM preview this for a second. And you can see that this is now posterized every 5 frames. So let's actually go ahead. Let's just turn off the hold time here, that posterization, and let's add more movement to our bees. So I'm going to go into my bee composition here, and let's just say I want to add random animation to the antenna rotation here. So what I'm going to do is select the rotation values on those antenna layers. You can see I have the axis point or the axis centers where I want this to rotate from. And for this, since I'm only dealing with rotation, I don't need to separate the dimensions because we're just dealing with one value here. And maybe bring the amplitude a little bit lower. And then I'm going to create a shared controller that's actually going to control both of these rotation layers. So I'll just check on share controller, and then I'll just add this to null, and I'll hit wiggle it. And we can actually rename whatever this wiggle it controller is. So this will be antenna. So we can keep track of all of our wiggles. And now we can see that our antennas are wiggling very happily. One really cool thing is, again, we can actually turn off the index layer seed, so these will actually loop the same. But what if we want to add some frequency randomness here? So let's just increase the frequency here. And if I increase the frequency random, you can see that we're introducing some random frequency, so they're not moving exactly the same. Another cool thing to do to really have more fine-tuned control over the frequency randomness is using this offset time. And this is really handy when you have a lot of, say, oscillation, and you just want to offset just a little bit. So we're just going to offset in the X because this is technically rotation X. And you can see as I crank up the X time here, we're actually slightly offsetting the movements here. So we can have fine-tuned control over some slight offsets to create some really interesting animations. So let's apply some similar movement to the wings here. So I got the wing rotation, and this time I'm actually going to go into the random mode and just cover what the random mode can do. So same thing, I'm going to just let's just leave all these values the same. We'll go and again share controller because I want one single wiggle to control both of these rotation values. Add to null, that's fine. I'll hit wiggle it, and I'll just name this wings. And you can see this is actually going to add it to our wiggle it controllers layer. So everything's all nice and organized. And here is random mode. So here's just your classic wiggle. And here's your random mode that is applied to the wings. So what this is going to do, as you can see, my wings are kind of all over the place. And that's because my minimum and maximum is set to 0 and 100. So 0 degrees to 100 degrees. So what I need to do is actually change this and maybe have it more 25 degrees and maybe -55. We can see what that looks like. And that's probably a little bit too much. So maybe just a little of a negative, a smaller negative value in here. So you can see that using the random wiggle mode, we have full control over the range of that wiggle, as well as the interpolation. So right now we have sine interpolation. Let's just crank up the frequency here. And you can see that this is looking pretty good. Let's actually turn on oscillate so we can just have like wings flapping. And the great part about the random mode is we can change this to something like quart, or quad, and you can see the different movements in here. And maybe some of them are more conducive to wing flapping than others. So maybe exponential. Crank this up even more. And say we want a little bit of offset on the wings as well. We can do just a little bit of frequency random, so 5%. And then once we input a frequency random in here, we can then offset that frequency, or that time offset. And you can see that we have a slight, like almost like follow through, or a little bit of offset there that just adds a little bit of variation to that wing. Cool, so we got our wings flapping, our antenna moving, and again, no keyframes added at all. It's just all controlled by the wiglet expression here. And we can go back into our beehive composition, and now we actually have our bees moving around and flapping their wings. So let's move on to the caterpillar. And just like I did with the bee antenna, I can do the same thing with the antenna here. So I'll select my rotation, and I'll do random mode here as well. And this will be antenna. So again, I have to control the minimum and maximum rotation values I want in here. So something like that. And we'll just turn on oscillate. And again, we can change this to say eases, and maybe constrain this a little bit more. Bring down the frequency to maybe 0.8. And again, we can offset a little bit of the frequency there and maybe do some X offset so they're just a little bit offset, and that looks a lot more interesting than them both going at the same time. So a little bit of offset makes your animation look a little bit more interesting. And again, I can loop this. So let's just see, our frame range goes all the way to 59. So I'll just put in 59 in here, and you can see that my antenna is now seamlessly looping back and forth. Looking good. And now I can go ahead to my caterpillar body here, and you can see that I have two shape layers here. What I'm going to do is just add some random rotation to the caterpillar legs here, and I'll use classic wiggle it for this. And I'll just hit wiggle it, rename this legs, and you can see that now we have this wiggly movement here. Let's have this actually oscillate. And then you can see that this doesn't actually look like a caterpillar walking so much. So this is again where the random frequency in that time offset comes in handy to help offset the leg movement here. So you can see this is looking a little bit better. And again, let's make sure that this loops. So let's, I believe this is 59 frames as well. Yeah, so we'll put 59 in there. And then we can also add, say, maybe a little bit of hold time or posterization. So maybe a hold time of 1. So you can see this is just a little bit staggered, or maybe 2. So you can see that adding this X offset, we can get these kind of walky animations just offsetting one of the rotations versus the other. And again, no keyframes on this whatsoever. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go into our actual caterpillar composition. So we have our legs moving, we have our antenna moving as well. Let's actually apply some wiggle to the position of the actual body segments here. So I'm going to select the position on all these guys. I'm going to go and say separate dimensions because I only want to apply wiggle in the Y. So I'll just change this to 0 and then change X or Z to 0 and hit wiggle it. And this will be the body segments. And you can see that now I have this nice wiggle going on. Let's increase, say, the frequency. And let's just make sure that everything loops. And we can easily do that putting in 59 in the loop time. And again, this is where, you know, if we have oscillate here, we want some predictable random movements. But if we want to offset the actual body segments here, we can again simply go to frequency random just to add some random frequency. And then instead of X offset, we're actually doing all of our movement in the Y. So I'll adjust that Y offset. And you can now see that we have this nice caterpillary movement by adjusting that time offset there. So really, really cool. And maybe this frequency is going a little bit too fast. And we can adjust the Y value there as well. So you can see that we created a really cool animation, again with no keyframes, and just offsetting the wiggle, the oscillated wiggle, and made a really interesting animation. So let's just add some rotation to the head here, maybe a little bit of bobbing as well. So let's actually do position and rotation on the caterpillar head. So we'll actually have this share a controller, and I'll just keep separate dimensions on, wiggle it, and this will be the head rotation. So now you can see that the head is now moving, and the X will actually control the rotation here. So now you can see we have some really nice rotation and position stuff happening. Maybe a little bit too much rotation values here. So the X is controlling rotation and the actual X on the position as well, because this is a shared controller. Let's go ahead and make sure this loops as well. So loop time of 59 frames, and then we can even add some hold time to this as well. This will prevent you from ever having to write a single wiggle expression ever again. This is all the wiggle that you'll need using Wiggle-It. And again, no keyframes whatsoever. This is all just procedural wiggle animation applied to my caterpillar. So in addition to being able to apply wiggle to layer properties, we can also do add wiggle to effects as well. So say we add some glow or anything like that, we can wiggle glow strength, all that good stuff. We can also wiggle color. So I have my little Mario star here. Let's just select the color. And for this, I don't need to separate dimensions. I'll just bring up the amplitude here. So what this is going to do is just offset from this color. So let's just go ahead. I don't need a share controller. I'll just add this to null. And you can see this is adding some really nice wiggle in the color field here. So I can crank up the amplitude. So you can see we got some really nice movement going on. We can go ahead and loop this as well. So we can have a seamless loop. And again, we can keyframe the amplitude on and off. So we can have our little Mario star start without any color randomness at all, and then just trigger that by amping up the amplitude there, and we got our nice happy Mario star. So one more thing that's a really useful application of Wiggle-It is to have like a shaky camera. So here I have my little null here, and that's actually controlling the position of my pug face here. Got my pug snoring right on the floor here. But let's go ahead and we're going to adjust the position and the scale and the rotation here. So I can actually control these independently. So what I'm going to do is just add a wiggle to position. So I'll go ahead and I'll separate dimensions out. I'll have a shared controller and I'll just add this to null, and this will be the position. And then I'll go ahead and add one to scale. So this will be scale. And then one to rotation as well. And I don't need to separate out dimensions because I'm only dealing with one rotation value there. And I'll just add that, and this will be rotation. So now I have full control of the position, scale, and rotation wiggles. So I can adjust this independently. I can constrain proportions, which is important when dealing with scale. You want to have that checked on. So everything will be driven by that X value when you're doing that. So the scale will actually scale up proportionally. We can adjust the scale amount here and the amplitude of the rotation here. So now we have a lot of wiggling going on. You can see we got some really cool shaky cam happening. So let's make sure that all of this actually loops, because again, we want to ultimately make like an animated looping GIF of this. So again, 59 frames is the length of our composition. So we'll just put 59 in all of these loop time here. You can see that as I RAM preview this, that is a seamless looping pug on camera. So some other things we can do, we can not only animate the camera shake, but let's go ahead and animate the tongue like he's panting. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to separate out dimensions because I only want to apply wiggle to the Y. So I'll hit 0. And actually, let's use random mode here. So let's have a negative, maybe a negative 20 and a negative 20 and a positive 20 in here. And no Z. And we'll just add this. Again, I didn't select my property, so that's important. So let's go ahead and go to my tongue. So let's adjust the position, and we'll add a wiggle to the position here. So let's go ahead and let's just have a random wiggle. And with that position selected, we'll just change this to tongue. And you can see that with the Y, with the maximum and minimum there, you can see that we now have, whoop, tongue's flying out, so we'll just move that a little bit there. But we now have our nice tongue animation here. And the great part about this is we can oscillate, and then we can choose the right type of interpolation that makes for a really nice tongue wag like that. And you can see that sine is actually pretty good. So we can just see what other ones look like here. So maybe exponential looks better. So this is kind of the power of the random mode here, is that you can have a little bit more control over the type of animation that's applied, or the type of random wiggle movements that's applied. And I think I like sine the best. So I'll stick with that. And now what I want to do is, so I have the wiggle applied to the camera wiggle as well as the tongue. Now I want to apply some wiggle to the eyes, so it almost looks like the pug is looking around very nervously. So let's go ahead to our eye positions here, and I actually have two shape layers that make up the eyes. So what I want to do is go into my contents here, and it's the first ellipse, and if I go ahead and select the position on that iris, and then the iris position on this as well, I can go ahead and have another shared controller. And this time I'm going to use classic wiggle because I just want to apply some pretty basic wiggle to it. I'll have this as shared controller so it can control both of these positions here. And I'll just hit wiggle. And this will be eyes. And now what I can do is, you can see that there's some random, very slight random movements being applied to the eyes. You can definitely see it a little bit more now. So that's a little bit too much. But now what I want to do is make this look more like eyeball movements. So what's going to help us out here is going to our other options here and maybe choosing some hold time. So it's more like the eyes are darting all over the place. Let's even increase the hold time here to maybe 6. So now you can see that he's kind of moving around, like moving his eyeballs around very nervously. Maybe a hold time of 8. So now you can see that his eyes are moving a little bit more. We can up the frequency here. So maybe let's do like 11. So now you can see he's kind of like looking around. Both of his eyes are being controlled by the same wiggle, so they're going to both look in the right directions, which is nice. And again, let's have this be loopable. So 59 frames long, so we'll put that in there. And all of my wiggles now loop. except for my tongue. So let's go and just make sure everything is loopable here. So actually nothing in here is loopable yet. So let's put in the frame range of 59 into everything so we can make a nice animated GIF out of this. Gotta make nice animated GIFs of pugs. So let's just RAM preview that. You can see that we now have a nice looping animation of a pug caught on candid camera. One more thing we can do is actually adjust the opacity of our little recording circle there. So I can just go here and apply we don't need to separate out dimensions because again we're just dealing with one single property here. So I'll just add this to layer and I'll just apply the wiggle there, and you can see that if I up the amplitude here, you can see that now I have that red dot kind of fading in and out. We can have this oscillate. So now it looks like a little recording dot is recording. And again, make sure this loops, put in 59 frames here. And with that, no keyframes, but we animated so many elements in this scene and we made it loop using Wiggle It. So that just shows you a little bit of what Wiggle It can do. I hope you enjoyed this little overview. If you have any questions, there's also a very handy help file in here as well that goes over all the many options that are included in Wiggle It. Using Wiggle It has really helped out my animation workflow, made me a faster animator, and it's going to do the same thing for you. Thanks for watching, everyone.